In the previous episodes, we delved into the ways the U.S. military employed in navigating the Chu Chi tunnels and how the Viet Cong countered the American tactics. The strategies of the U.S. troops, like using Viet Cong Germany to detect pumping tear gas into the tunnels to force the Vietnamese soldiers out, flooding the Chu Chi tunnels with water from the Saigon River, using B-52 plane to bomb the tunnels, or US F-5 aircraft to drop bombs, all ended in gruesome failure. Even deploying a mighty force for sweeping operations or bombing in various ways proved futile. The U.S. military even brought in massive bulldozers to clear the tunnels, using heavy tanks to crush the tunnels during Operation Cedar Falls. So why did Operation Cedar Falls still end in failure? How did the Viet Cong manage to thwart those colossal bulldozers and advanced tanks? Let's explore in this video now. In those days in Chu Chi, there was Mr. Hoai Duc, a man whose knowledge only reached reading and writing, with some mechanical skills related to cars, but without any education in bomb making. Yet, he was the one who ingeniously crafted the gat mines that trapped tanks, making the American military shed tears in their battles against the Vietnamese forces in Chu Chi. Initially, he borrowed 2 mines from the military officials, Russian mines, to study and then used them to test on U.S. tanks. However, these mines required direct pressure to explode. Placing a bomb between the tank's wheels had no effect at all. This drove him to experiment further, leading him to extract explosive material from bullets and unexploded bombs to create these mines. He added a firing mechanism, leaving a small hole for a long stick. When a tank rolled over the stick, it triggered a powerful explosion without needing direct pressure. According to statistics, due to Mr. Hoai Duc's innovation, nearly 5,000 American tanks were destroyed in Chu Chi. Most were taken down by his handmade mines. This astonishing feat drew numerous foreign journalists after the war to interview Mr. Duc out of sheer curiosity and unbelievable. For them, a highly educated person with ample credentials couldn't achieve what he did. So, how could a rural youth with basic literacy outwit and improve combat weaponry so effectively? An Australian war correspondent named Burchett, who was stationed in Vietnam, sought an interview with Mr. Duc. He asked, "Given the unknown danger, how could you take such risks?" Mr. Duc replied that soldiers on the battlefield face death whether from a tiny bullet or a big bomb. The value of death is the same, size doesn't matter in this case. Hearing Mr. Duc's response, Burchett, the journalist, was deeply surprised, nodding in admiration. To the Vietnamese, figures like Mr. Duc were not hard to comprehend. But for Americans and Westerns, it was unfathomable. Vietnamese people had limited access to modern weapons due to lack of education and resources. Just looking still has no chance, let alone inventing ways to combat sophisticated weaponry. According to former Vietnamese Prime Minister Vo Van Kiet, a high-ranking leader in the Chu Chi battlefield, the Vietnamese soldiers saw American M113 armored vehicles swimming across the river, a sight as strange as encountering an alien species. At first, they heard distant rumblings that echoed like thunder beneath the ground. Then, unfamiliar vehicles appeared, moving in a line. The Vietnamese soldiers didn't recognize these vehicles. They gathered by the river, pointing and discussing, trying to figure out what kind of vehicles these were. Initially, they thought the tanks on the opposite bank couldn't cross the river, so they stood at the riverside, joking for fun. However, the tanks plunged into the river, crossing to their side. The Vietnamese soldiers were stunned and rushed back into the tunnels to hide. Later, they learned that those were M113 armored vehicles, capable of both swimming and shooting. Initially, the Vietnamese forces were wary of these armored vehicles as they were versatile and unpredictable. Able to cross water, move on land, and fire weapons and even transported soldiers. But after devising the gat mine strategy, the Vietnamese military started to wish for these vehicles to come to Chu Chi in abundance for economic gain. The overseas Chinese community knows that the Viet Cong has successfully beaten M113, flocked to Chu Chi to order parts and materials in bulk, like scrap metal collectors do today. Components, machinery, even aluminum casings, each piece could be sold for about $100 to $150 in 1967. This influx of funds enabled them to buy rice, salt, and medicine, supporting a company of about 100 soldiers for a whole week. As the supplies almost dwindled, the Vietnamese soldiers would sit by the river, eagerly awaiting the armored vehicles, because if this kind of vehicle came, they had scrap to sell, making money. If not, they had nothing to eat. Although the US Army failed in tricks with the most advanced techniques, it lost a lot of money. However, the purpose of the US was still to clean up the Vietnamese guerrilla army in the Chu Chi tunnels. So the US military did not want to stop at this defeat. So how did the US military change its tactics? What weapons or fighting methods can be used to clear the guerrilla army hiding in the tunnels? And how the Vietnamese army against the US Army? Let's find out in the next episode. In a survey of U.S. officers who served in the Vietnam War, 44% rated the South Vietnamese Liberation Army as good and gritty. One officer observed,
"Americans tend to underestimate their opponents. In fact, the Vietnamese military is the best adversary the U.S. military has ever faced in history."
Along with that, General Lindsey Keong is an American historian with many years working in Vietnam. He once remarked that Central Vietnam is where the most elite troops of the American Army confront the regular troops from North Vietnam. A Marine sergeant after a battle suddenly told his commander,
"Sir, the North Vietnamese soldiers are as good as we are."
It should be known that American Marines are the most elite fighters, chosen from the infantry. These can be said to be the most relevant evidence to show the stubbornness, will and intelligence of the Vietnamese army. As in the previous issue about Chu Chi, we have a certain image about it. Many people have wondered when did the Vietnamese army dig the Chu Chi tunnels? Who designed it? After digging the tunnel, where did the soil and sand hide so that it wouldn't be discovered? The answer is that there are no architects to design. That is the work of the people of Chu Chi. This is a work that the world's leading architects must also respect when known. The tunnel was made in 1948 to fight against the French. The French leaders of that day had argued that the Viet Minh were incapable of fighting a more modern and large Western army. That day, the French thought, just fight as many big campaigns they had fought, the Viet Minh had to surrender. However, when embarking on the implementation, they understand that it is a mistake. With the guerrilla tactic, the Vietnamese military has been proactive in everything, forcing the French to fight in their own style, making it more and more difficult. Fighting for a while, the French realized that the Viet Minh never wore uniforms and participated in fighting of all ages and genders. The biggest difficulty of the French was to identify what friends in the Viet Minh were. An all-people war that Vietnam deployed caused French soldiers, and later American soldiers, not knowing how to fight. At first, the Vietnamese soldiers dug small tunnels for the main purpose of defense, as long as they got underground to escape. However, they later realized that any tunnel can be used to attack because the tunneling helps them to get close to their enemy's armpits and deliver very dangerous attacks that surprise them. Since then, the Vietnamese army has come up with a way to connect the tunnels together. The more they beat, the more they expanded, and later on, the tunnel was 16,000 hectares wide, almost equivalent to an area of Washington, D.C. It was so big that people had to put road signs in a few places so that newcomers wouldn't get lost. Chu Chi is a very special place. The soil is gravel and rock, with extremely solid texture, very suitable for tunneling. To find groundwater there, dig down to a depth of about 25 to 30 meters. Tunneling in Chu Chi that day was very hard. In the dry season of hard soil, it took one day to dig a 6-meter-long tunnel. In the rainy season, soft soil can be excavated twice as fast. Having the strength to dig tunnels is one thing, it's so important where to throw the soil away. Letting the U.S. Army detected an attack, it is considered a failure. The people here have figured out how to carry the soil poured into the surrounding river, or spread it all over the forest. In many places, it was poured into the fields, or filled in bomb craters. The more bombs that destroy, the more holes Viet Cong has to dump soil on, the more convenient it is to camouflage to dig a tunnel. In the previous video we have seen, U.S. soldiers are always looking for ways to destroy the tunnels. They used tear gas, pumped water into the tunnel, and then even used loudspeakers to call their enemy to surrender. Maybe many of you will ask the question, so why does the U.S. not use bombs? But all that thought is just theory. that day, they even used 200 to 300 kilograms bombs to throw it down. Its destructive power was much worse than we thought, but then it was unable to destroy the tunnels simply because the Vietnamese military always knew the moment the US Air Force bombs to dodge. If a bomb collapsed, it would only collapse a very small part of the hundreds of kilometers of tunnels. Regarding this, the Viet Cong reconnaissance team will give information about whenever the aircraft gathered in the airport is about to take off. It will definitely prepare to bomb. Or there is another simple way, which is that the Republic of Vietnam Army suddenly withdraws from an area, then that place will be where the bombs fell. Having that information helps the Viet Cong to greatly reduce losses. One more experience that is also classified as classics of the Vietnamese Army is the belief in the bomb never being dropped into the same place twice. Each B-52 plane, when passing, usually leaves a long strip of bomb craters. A few minutes later there will be another plane coming, but let the next bomb fall right into the hole where the bomb before. That is a very difficult thing. That's why in between bombings, the Viet Cong will see where the crater was first created. If the pit is right above a tunnel but doesn't cause the tunnel to collapse, then they will go straight into hiding in the tunnel that was just hit by a bomb. This is a very good experience, which makes American pilots have to practice their whole life. It is unlikely that they can do it, that is to drop 2 bombs and let those 2 bombs fall in the same place. Bombing like that felt ineffective, and the Americans invented a new bomb with much greater damage. This bomb did not explode on the ground but went deep into the ground before the timer inside detonated. The depth when plugged into the ground depends on the topography and soil type. US F-5 aircraft kept swooping one hit to let the bomb fall at an appropriate angle drilled into the ground. This is a very dangerous type of attack, extremely high damage, but it requires the pilot to have very good technique. Knowing this type of attack, the Vietnamese soldiers have come up with a way to deal with it. That is, if they wait for it to dive down to them, they use a submachine and machine gun to shoot up. If the plane did not crash, they die. If the plane crashed, they had material to make a new pot and bowl to use. In 1969 an F-5 only dropped the bomb that hit the tunnel, killing 40 people. This is a number that can show how devastating a US bomb is. The damage is so much, but with this kind of attack, the Viet Cong only has that way uses to counter it. Both sides were damaged, but the US considered the campaign was not effective. That was why they had to give up. Bombing felt not good. The US turned to the option of taking bulldozers to plow Chu Chi up soil. The campaign was named Cedar Falls, which means to peel the earth because do not know exactly where the tunnel is located. That is why the US mobilizes a large number of troops. 12 vehicles, each weighing 60 tons, were lined up horizontally to plow the soil and Chu Chi up, dig down deeply, then send mines to strike. This new type of attack is very dangerous for the Vietnamese soldiers, but fortunately after the previous battle crimp they carefully strengthened and dug deeper, so less damage. Of course it is just a relief, but the damage to them is still great. For that reason, they had to think of a way to counter this tactic. Because of that, the Viet Cong had to think of a way to counter this tactic. Just stand still and let the US Army bomb. They would lose. That day they installed intelligence inside the US military ranks before, to get its information. Seeing that bulldozers are mobilized in the military base, they will find out what the US Army schedule is, how much in place to know. That is why the damage is also somewhat less. In addition to bulldozers, tanks are also something that American soldiers use regularly to beat tunnels that makes the Vietnamese Army extremely uncomfortable. Tanks are not only normal tanks, but the US Army also uses amphibious tanks. This tank was maneuverable on both the ground and below, making the soldiers and people of Chu Chi unable to live in peace.
How do you think about this topic? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like and share this video. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our videos and much more. Click on the screen to watch another thrilling video. Thank you for joining us. See you in the next one. Take care.